Hello, everyone. Sorry about that. We have an amazing panel sponsored by All Voices. We are going to be talking about how to be an authentic employer of choice and ensuring that people feel valued. Our goal here is to share how to be an authentic employer, rooted in values, using our values, sharing tangible ways to demonstrate that you value folks at your organization. And we have some incredible people here today that I'm honored to be alongside. I will let them give their introductions. Just who I am, I'm Natan Fisher. I'm the co-founder of SingleSprout. We are a tech-enabled recruiting firm focusing on software engineering, product, data design, as well as legal recruiting for VC-backed tech startups. And I will pass it to Jess, Jasmine, and then Marsha on their own introductions. And my pronouns are he and him.
Hi, I am Jess Osrow. I am co-founder and CEO of The Rise Journey, which is organizational development and DEI consulting. Excited to be here today. Love these folks that are on the call. Jasmine, pass it to you. And pronouns she, her.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. I'm Jasmine Francis, pronouns she, her, hers. I am the Senior Director of People and Culture at Thinx, and Thinx specializes in underwear for periods and as well as incontinence. And I'm also the co-founder of a people practice focused, thank you, Jess, on consulting called Humanconnexion. I'm really excited to be here today. I will pass it along.
Good afternoon. I am Marsha, Lindsay, and I serve as the Chief Diversity, Inclusion, and Talent Officer at Pittsburgh Technical College. I will be approaching my 1 year in Pittsburgh, so I'm really excited to be here and participating. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm certainly looking forward to collaborating and learning more about my panelists and enjoying the opportunity.
Thank you, Jess, Jasmine, and Marsha. Just quick, for those who don't know, who aren't familiar with All Voices empowers employees to provide anonymous feedback, ask questions, share positive input, report harassment, bias, culture issues. They're incredible. I would definitely check them out, and they're helping to power great conversations all across the board. We'll just jump straight into it. So, and for those that are watching on the sidelines, please, if you have any questions, follow-up questions, commentary, we'd love to see it in the chat. We'll do our best to get to it. And again, so honored to be here with Marsha, Jasmine, Jess. So we'll just jump into it. And first question about defining authenticity. What does it mean to be an authentic employer of choice when employees are different? And are looking for personalization. So we have different employees that are at different points of their lives. They are in different parts of their careers as well. How do you define authenticity in that environment? Jasmine, maybe you want to take the first hack?
Sure, let's do it. Yeah, so you know what? I really think it starts with understanding what authenticity means to each person. It looks so different to everybody. Being authentic to me means, you know, being forthcoming about my mental health challenges, being a Black woman, being, you know, from, you know, DC, North Carolina, New Jersey, all of these different things. And so how I show up and all these things that make me me, that's part of my story. And so I need to be able to be in an inclusive environment where I can show up and be all of those things. And I have an organization that can support me in being as such. And so really, you know, being an authentic employer is about showing up for your people in the way that they need to be supported. There is not a one size fits all authentic employer definition. I think it's really having, the key is really being broad and not having any type of constraints and being flexible and understanding that it looks different for each person.
Thanks, Jasmine. Jess or Marsha, anything to add? And I'm kind of curious also to touch on values. right? And looking at values when we're trying to use a set of values that pertain to all of our employees, but people are different too. Anything there, Jess or Marsha?
So to piggyback what Jasmine said, one of the things I think is imperative is for us to talk about authenticity. We need to know who we are in our authentic selves. And, we want to gain the trust and confidence from those we serve in our community, whether it be at work or, in your personal life. So I think that's important. And I think that ensuring that leadership understands the imperative about authenticity. We're striving at PTC to ensure that we have a culture that is authentic and not aspirational. So we have to understand what that looks like, not only for ourselves as an individual, but as an institution as a whole.
I have a slightly different take in terms of, I know that every employer is not for every employee. And I think it's important for an employer to recognize who they are, what their values are, what their mission is. If your mission is to make a lot of money and do something really well, some people are going to be ready and aligned with that. That doesn't mean you have the right to mistreat employees or not have things in place, but how you work and how you define how you work can be authentic, and it's still not work for some employees. And that's okay, as long as you're not trying to force anybody, or you specifically cater your hiring process to find the right folks and bring in your values and bring in what's authentic to that process. I think with Gen Z and all in the news, they want something very different than potentially what boomers want. And I mean that boomers, with the term no offense, as a categorization, not as an offensive term. And it's important for an organization, for their C-suite, for their leadership to recognize, authenticity for themselves, but also who they are as a leader within the organization, and just live that and breathe that and talk about that transparently. Because if it's not right for somebody, that's okay. Figure out a pathway to, offboard off the company or inboard, onboard people, but, don't necessarily try to be everything for everyone.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if what I'm hearing is transparency first of who's, representing the company, who they are, and obviously transparency in who is at the company, what the company stands for, being open about that. Jess, I thought that was a great point. I saw in one of the articles on LinkedIn today was that Gen Z, 80% want a job that better aligns with their values. And then 76% more opportunities to learn and practice new skills, 61% upward mobility. However, when you look at millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers, mainly focused in this poll, at least, on compensation and benefits in their next role. So interesting. And obviously all of these, we should be as transparent as possible. How do we encourage employees to express their authenticity at work, Jasmine?
Yeah, I just want to go back to what Jess mentioned as well. Like another theme that I'm hearing as well is being human. That is what this all comes down to, like being authentic and being human. And, having that show up in the values is really, really important. And not everybody's going to align to those values, right? And that's why, kind of to what Jess's point is, as you have new hires or candidates coming on board and you're interviewing them, you want to understand, how do they align to the values? Because you want to create not just a one size fits all type of employee workforce. You want to have people who add to the values in their authentic way. And so that means it's going to look like so many different things, but there is going to be some type of theme and fabric because they're all aligned to the values. And so I'm so sorry, Natan, do you mind repeating that question? I got so into that.
No worries. No, that's great. How do we encourage our employees to express their authenticity at work?
Yeah, I think, thank you for repeating that. I think it comes down to, again, what Marsha was saying, being authentic in who you are and knowing who you are, while also balancing the fact that you are at work. There are, there are going to be unspoken rules and norms that happen within there. And so making sure that you're transparent, number one. I would say meet as many people as you can and be a little bit vulnerable. That's the only way that people are going to understand sometimes the why. So, for me, I may get passionate about certain topics and maybe it comes off a certain way, But if you take the time to get to know me, or I proactively become vulnerable with certain people, then they'll get to know the reason why. And so that helps to create a level of comfortability, not only for allowing people to be authentic, but hearing people's stories and finding a bridge to connect with them to create a more inclusive environment.
Yeah, I love that. I think the more, especially on the people side of the people teams, the more you can encourage your employees connecting with each other, the more that's going to come out. I know there's an app on Slack that some use called Donut, and providing those atmospheres, not just the happy hour, which some love, some don't, but actually putting people together to really learn of who is this person that's on the other side, and so much these days on the other side of the computer.
I want to jump in really quickly, Natan, and this is really important for leadership, because if leadership doesn't demonstrate authenticity, if they don't demonstrate vulnerability, you can't ask your employees to. I previously worked at a mental health startup, and the CEO talked about his family members' mental health conditions, but not his own. And while we appreciated him sharing his story, if he had talked about his own, so many others would have been willing to talk about their own. And so you have to go out on a limb sometimes. You have to just say, oh, this is not what the CEO of the 1950s would have done. And that probably means you're on the right track if it's not the thing that the CEO in the 1950s would have done. If you're not willing to do it, you shouldn't ask your employees to do it.
Well said. Well said. Marsha, anything to add there?
No, I do agree again that the vulnerability part is important. One of the things we have to do is step outside of our fear as well, because I think as a leader, whether you're well established or moving up the ladder, I think oftentimes we feel that in order for us to demonstrate that leadership attribute, it has to be about strength and power and certain things that you necessarily wouldn't share. You feel are important, but then you're apprehensive. So I think as long as you, again, recognize who you are and what you can contribute, I think that in itself, you're not going to reach everyone. Those personal experiences that you have are going to engage those individuals who may be struggling with sharing a part of who they are because they don't want to be judged. But I think, again, as you've both stated, the vulnerability is paramount, because at the end of the day, we are human. We are all subject to having the same challenges at varying times in our lives. And I think that however we choose to communicate that and convey that to the individuals that we're working with, I think that it also helps to establish us as someone who, at any time, though we may not have the experience, we've demonstrated that vulnerability, and they will feel more comfortable sharing their concerns and any challenges they may be having, and know that they're going to be in a circle, an environment of safety, which is very, very important as well.
That's right. One thing I learned from, I believe this was Jess and probably Jasmine as well, is we have a part of our meetings where we talk about, it's a little bit different, but we talk about lessons and challenges that we face, mistakes that we've made, and starts with myself, other co-founder, people that are in leadership, and really gives an avenue and a channel for being open more to, hey, not everything is great. We're making mistakes. We're doing better. There's areas where we messed up and we can admit it. And hopefully that gives an opportunity for the rest of the team to share the same and be open and find curiosity there. Moving on, and Marsha, you touched on this with psychological safety. Does your organization have resources for employees to report issues to keep things safe and confidential? And if so, does the organization share issues on a broader scale for transparency? Does anyone want to take that?
Great question. And I'm sure that we'll all have a variety of ways of conveying just that. I have been with PTC almost a year. And one of the things I'm proud to say is leadership is very, very supportive. I'm in an environment where the traditional model was that of as a close-knit family, and the institution has operated for 75 years with that model. Over the last 3 years since President Dr. Harvey Smith has come on board, we've recognized that there are things that could have been differently. So one of the things I focused on was building relationships with employees, learning about some of their challenges, whatever they may be, and recognizing that some of the obstacles that we had to overcome was that of communication. So like All Voices, there are other organizations that have resources that can be then submitted anonymously, because employees shared that because the institution is so small, their fear and concern was, as discreet as you might want to be, if there wasn't a process in place for sharing concerns, whatever they may be, it would then be communicated well above and beyond whomever should have been involved. So we do have a resource in place. Also launched a campaign that's called We Are Listening, and it gives our students, staff, employees, and just the community that we're intersecting with opportunities that if there are things that they're not seeing at PTC that demonstrate what we're calling our culture of care, we want to know about it. And the responsiveness is also the next most important thing. If someone is brave enough to share a concern or issue, we cannot then have a placeholder and not take action. So I am very forward facing. I love what I do. I love people. And as many as you know, when we're in an environment where we are ourselves, sometimes our passion then seems to be a little more assertive or aggressive than you want it to be. But the point is to ensure that if someone has the confidence to share something that is of concern, we have to be empathetic, we have to be active, and we have to ensure that no matter what they communicate, even if it's not what we want to hear, we have to acknowledge it and take the steps to communicate it. My final point before I allow one of my panelists to elaborate is, when I hear of an issue and I share it with leadership, I always say it's been brought to my attention, because I want them to know that it's something that's actionable, something that isn't isolated, and something that even if only one person may have shared it with me, it's worth communicating, because there may be others that have felt or experienced some of the same challenges, and it gives them more confidence to know that, okay, they're listening. So you can't have a system in place or a process or a line of communication that's not active and moving all the time to ensure that employees feel safe and feel heard. So thank you.
Thanks, Marsha. That's great. Jess or Jasmine, anything to add there?
I would just say, if you have programs, if you have software, train people on them, make sure it's part of onboarding, make sure there are refresher programs every 4 to 5 months, make sure that people know how to use it and they know how to access it. A lot of times the stuff will get buried in an intranet. You can't have it get buried in an intranet. You have to find ways to resurface it, so people know that the resources are always there.
And I would just add on to that, I think it's important to do a quick assessment of readiness for an organization to understand what's the best method by which employees should report something like this. You know, there are the culture of different organizations that it's all over the place, right? Like you can have a culture that's like super trusting, and you can have a culture that's, you know, it's shifting right now and it's going through a time of transition. And so maybe there is a little bit of mistrust. And so, you know, there's not a one size fits all of a solution, out of the box solution of reporting and creating a type of psychological safety that's needed for every type of organization. So I do think I just want to add the point that making sure that there is readiness and the fact that there is trust, there is empathy, there is compassion, there is support, kind of what Marsha was saying, on when people are bold and vulnerable enough to share these types of reports, that there is going to be someone on the other end that's going to bring it up, that's going to action it. So if you're in an organization that's not fully staffed in order to support people, then you need to think a little bit differently about how you go about providing that respective avenue. So again, not a one size fits all approach.
What do you, quick question to follow up on that, Jasmine, when you say readiness, how do you know?
So I think it depends on where you are culturally, you know, like if you have a culture that is trusting, that is honest, that is transparent, that talks about being human, talks about being imperfect. And from an org design perspective, you have the support that you need. If somebody should report, you know, there should be a lot of reports. There is somebody that is trained and skilled to not only support the employee or employees, but they also have the influence to create policies or speak with leadership. So, you know, you don't want to implement something that you're not ready for, although you may have really good intentions, it could like potentially just do the opposite if you implement something and then it's not reaching the final goal because you didn't do an assessment to understand, is the organization ready for this?
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And I love that, because people might be calling for it, but are they ready for it? Is the infrastructure in place? And once you do
Yes.
bring it on, what's the integration? What's the training? You know, it's almost like you got to go from step A to A1 to B to B1 to B2, like before taking to step C or whatever. You know, that looks like there's baby steps there. Jess, were you going to say something? Okay. Cool. This is super helpful. And I think, obviously you all know from a lot of experience, in terms of, you know, looking at key ingredients for ideal workplace, so that hopefully we don't have to go there. What are some commonalities you've seen in the past, in the present, where we're going, that can aid in creating a very transparent and, for lack of better words, great workplace, great place to be every day? Who would like to jump in?
I'll jump in. Mine is going to be really obvious in its benefits. I want to know not just, okay, cool, do I have healthcare? Are you paying for healthcare? But I just froze eggs. I froze embryos. It was a process. The organization I was most recently at offered benefits, and then when we were laid off, canceled them. And that was a huge blow. And I had been working and staying there partially because of getting the benefits. And so that was a way to retain me as a younger woman, potentially to retain me as they had a great parental leave policy when I was ready. And so thinking about, you know, how often are those benefits used? Probably not that often, but it helps you become an employer of choice. Do you have benefits that help people transition? And if they're going through gender reassignment or any kind of phase of that, do you even have a healthcare plan that allows for them to get coverage of some of their needs, or do they have to pay everything out of pocket? If they are paying out of pocket, do you have a reimbursement program? So that way you're covering these things, because they are usually small percentages of your population, but it means that you're going to attract more people who either identify that way, have a family friend who identifies in a certain way, whatever, because most people want to be a part of an ecosystem that is equitable, that is supporting others, even if it doesn't affect them personally.
Just makes a good point. I think when we talk about benefits, the main focus is on the compensation and the visible benefits that we know are always there. I think as an institution of our size, we're a small institution, we also have to be agile and recognize that the culture that existed for the past 74 years is shifting. Not only is it with just the diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and accessibility, but it's also with the other aspects of diversity that people do not think about. And it's those silent things. Jess made a good point. Though I may not understand the impact and gravity of thinking about having a family by whatever means, I do want to work at an institution in which, if they are surveying employees and identifying things that may be there or need to be improved upon, it is addressed. And we also have to think about being ready, that if we can't meet all those needs, having some options. Again, with a small institution, our benefits probably are not as competitive as those of, University of Pittsburgh or those the like, but we have to recognize that we have to service the employees that we have now and the ones we hope to attract. So there are some benefits that if you recognize are not being utilized, for example, if you have a computer purchase program and only one computer has been purchased in the last 5 years, does that policy really need to be a priority one, visible to those when you're trying to attract candidates? Doing surveys, not only with the employees you have, but the ones you anticipated through predictive measures is important as well, because it's the whole employee that we have to service. And I think that that's when we talk about additional benefits, especially now in the climate of the pandemic. There are those of us who prefer to be on ground versus remote. But for those who are on ground, there's a certain degree of anxiety because you're feeling as if you're bearing the burden of everyone not being there on your shoulders. So, hey, if those employees that are coming on campus, maybe once a month, you order pizza or a nice salad from Chick-fil-A or whatever that is, to ensure that you're recognizing those who are on ground, but also making sure that opportunity is available for those who are working remotely, because we're all living this challenge, but in very different ways. And so sometimes, again, the benefits don't have to be policy oriented. They need to be just things that are actionable and active that I can do. If I notice Jasmine every day when she comes in, she says hi, and that one day she may not say hello, I need to be self-aware. Take the time to go and ask Jasmine, how are you feeling? It doesn't have to be a benefit that's prescribed by your organization, but one that you do to demonstrate kindness, empathy, and care for the people that you work with, so that that can be something within your cultural values. When you communicate that and someone comes indoor, you haven't stated it just to entice them, but they live and experience it daily in their environment at work with you.
I love, oh, go ahead.
No, go for it, Jasmine.
I'm getting excited here. I love everything that Jess said. I love everything that Marsha said. And I guess the piece that I just want to add is, in addition to the benefits being that those that are set forth by the organization, as well as those that are set forth by individuals that are actually within the organization, I would also add, another ingredient for success of an employer is to make sure that your employees are heard and seen. Many times at organizations, employees are looked at as employees, as human resources. They are resources. And many times, with the business being like, things are happening so fast and there are priorities that are competing and things just need to happen like this. A lot of time employees are just, they're numbers, right? And they're moved around, or maybe they're, they don't get a say in what's happening and what's going to impact their lives at the place that they work at. And so I would say providing avenues of opportunity for employees to say how they're feeling, to respond back to different changes that are happening within the organization, to have an avenue of just saying like, we just implemented this policy and I've noticed that the majority of my team has taken advantage of this policy and I just want to say it's great. Like, get that feedback and make sure that as an employer, you're not making decisions based on what you think as a leader is right, because your lived experience is going to be different than everybody else's, but taking the time to hearing other people out to say, okay, the feedback that we've gotten this far is this, or, we're receiving consistent feedback related to that. That is really important. And when an employee / a person / a human feels seen and heard, it's motivating. Attrition rates begin to decrease, turnover decreases, retention rates, are phenomenal. Learning and development, growth, all those things begin to do better and be better, because they feel as though the work that they're doing, it's valued and they're being seen and they're being heard. And not only that, but there's a response to it. They're being seen and they're being heard. And then there's something that's being done about it. And again, not everything's going to have an action, but at least they know that the right people are hearing what needs to be heard.
Very well said. Yeah, I think just to summarize that, what I'm hearing is the feedback loop is super important. Sharing what we're hearing, making sure there's a channel that we can get feedback in. Obviously, what Jess said, hands down, benefits. What does the company stand for? The policies, and Marsha sharing, and not just the benefits that we can see, but what does the company stand for behind those benefits? How do we create a community of kindness and care and people that are listening to each other? So I hope everyone that, obviously is listening at home to, these are all really great points. And, if you can create a company where people feel heard, turnover is going to go down. You're going to attract the right people, better people, probably people that want to fight to stay in the company and grow in the company. Let's move over to a very hot topic, the Great Reset, reshuffle, people moving around. Thoughts there? How has it impacted your organization? Marsha, do you want to take a hack there?
Certainly, and you'll hear me continually preface that in the higher education institution, it's a unique space because we do not often have the resources to make accommodations if someone leaves, a particular position. So as we talk about the great reset and reshuffle, a lot of what I'm seeing at my institution is that individuals are taking on more of a workload, which of course, then it's a challenge, not only for them, physically, but emotionally, mentally. And if you can't offer compensation as far as a financial one, we have to figure out ways to ensure that our employees still feel valued and appreciated, and explain why or why not a particular position may be backfilled, whether that's going to be repurposed, what that's going to look like for whether it be a short-term period or a long-time adjustment within their job role. And agility and flexibility is not a muscle that everyone is willing to use. So as we talk about the reshuffle, I think that it's important, again, if there's a position that is not going to be backfilled, we communicate it to the individuals it's going to impact. It looks very differently for someone that's on ground versus someone that's working remotely, because it'll be easier if I'm looking at Jasmine next to me and say, hey, there's some additional work that needs to be done, versus having to track Jess down either by, Twitter or Instagram, Facebook, email, whatever that may be, because we all have to understand that the reset and reshuffle looks different for everyone. Some of us can thrive when we have to do a multitude of things. Others are kind of content in doing the same thing the same way all the time. But with so many things changing, the challenge that higher education has overall is we have very specific requirements for jobs. So even though we hear that it's an employee market, we don't have the opportunity to reach out to any and everyone and say, hey, we need you to be an adjunct for welding, because you may have transferable skills, but those skills may not necessarily fit within the profile that we're looking for work. And we're challenged again. A lot of hours, our challenges are directly related to our revenue, which is through enrollment. If enrollment is low and people are leaving because they're overworked, it creates this continued cycle of stress and anxiety for everyone. So I think when we're talking about the reset reshuffle, we also have to recognize that by employer, it looks very differently. For some employers, they're like, great, this position is now vacant. We can repurpose that position to a department that was challenged before. But when you're facing that across your institution, it's a great challenge. So I think that as we talk about resetting, reshuffling, we need to acknowledge those employees who are going consistently above and beyond. And if we can't compensate them monetarily, we need to find things that ask them, hey, do you like going to the movie theater? And maybe buy them some movie tickets, whatever that may be, whatever that looks like, providing a compensation that means something to the individual employee is something that I think that is paramount as we continue to talk about this reset and this reshuffle.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing again is transparency, but also a really great point, which are the people that are staying at the company, that are for whatever reason that is. How do we honor them? How do we give them transparency? Not just say, hey, this person left, but maybe what are we going to do about this position? What does this mean for your responsibilities? And how do we compensate them or show our appreciation to them? That's big. I mean, that's big for loyalty. Jasmine, anything to add there?
Yeah, I haven't been in the full-time 9-to-5 workforce for a while. I feel like I'm working 9 to 9 these days. But for my peers who are, the reasons they're leaving is because the company is fragmented culturally. It's oftentimes they have heavy workloads, but they had heavy workloads before the pandemic. And so it's about these other, I love the non-visible benefits that Marsha was talking about, that the people they connect with online, offline, on-site, off-site, that is making them leave. They say, we need to find a community that I can be in. I'm happy to work hard, but a combination of burnout, overwork, and then losing your community, it's, 3 strikes are out.
I love that. And, another thing to add here is just that I remember Marsha was making the point about the fact that people are motivated by different things. And so I think a lot of times employers make an assumption that everybody's going to be motivated by money. And so if I give them more money, if I increase their salary, they'll stay. And we're all, again, like we're having this common theme throughout this conversation about being human and being driven by different things. It's like maybe money is a motivating factor to one person, but it may not be the same for everyone. And so there could be some people who say, I'm motivated by having better benefits, or I'm motivated by understanding what my growth trajectory looks like here. And I need someone to tell me when I'll be promoted in the next year or two. So we all are motivated by different things. And so I think employers, it's very common to say, like everyone's leaving, I need to do something. Let's throw money at them. Let's da-da-da-da. And it's like, no, let's pause. Let's understand who is here. Let's identify who our top talent or our high potentials are. And let's do a deeper dive to understand what motivates them, what drives them. And if there's commonalities throughout there, then maybe those are the focus points that we need to target. Do we need to increase our benefits? Are we not paying or covering enough for our benefits? Are we unclear about how to grow within the company? Are there clear competency matrices that say these are the skill sets and criteria that you need to move to the next level? People are staying at companies for different things. And so making sure that, no, we don't have to check every single box across the company, but we do need to be very strategic on understanding where do we want to focus and where do we want to invest to keep our top talent within the organization.
And one more thing I'd like to add is we talk about the generational gaps. And I have to honestly say, I think more of that boils down to mindset. There's always creative tension. And I have learned so much from individuals that are in decades behind me and those above me. But I think that when we focus on the things that are important to the individual, we have to make a conscious effort not to say, oh, millennials or X gens or, baby boomers, because again, I consider myself multidimensional. I'm of a generation where typically once we learn something, we want to stay in an organization until we retire. And, our only focus was on stability, but it's shifting because as we're recognizing that there are opportunities for even individuals in my generation to bounce around, learn new things, add, depth to whatever organization you're contributing to, it also matters to you as an individual what that looks like. Again, in my generation, it was about finding a job, staying there until you retire. It wasn't necessarily about upward mobility. It was about stability. And so all of those things are important for us to consider when we're thinking about whatever it is we're trying to do to improve an employee's experience. Because again, we are going to alienate a lot of individuals if we only perceive that based upon age, gender, or experiences, this is what it looks like. So that's just a point that I really wanted to, articulate, because I think that's important as well.
Great point. I think that there's a lot, it makes me think a lot about, go back to transparency, but understanding what people want. And kind of curious here for you all, and I'm just going to throw this impromptu question. How often should we be getting feedback as a whole on this information? I've heard once every 3 months, 6 months. Of course, we want to put action. If I'm sitting at home right now and I'm leading a people org, it seems like there's a lot of valuable information. Things are continually shifting. What's the appropriate time to get that information?
Ongoing. I just dropped in the chat, don't forget about state interviews. There's a lot of survey platforms out there, and at the bottom of the barrel, but still works, Google Forms. If you're worried about benefits, create a couple of questions for a state interview about benefits and keep those questions consistent and randomize who gets it. 2 people from this department, 2 people from this department, 2 people from this department, or a whole bunch of different levels. And even if you send it out to intentional people and you're keeping track, it still can be submitted anonymously. That could go out, you could do 20 employees weekly, assuming you have enough employees to do that, 20 times 52. And then you're getting constant feedback and you're not relying on specific moments in time, but that ongoing, as things change, as waves happen. If all of a sudden you see a huge dip in something or a huge rise in something, you can say, oh, something is happening. Like, let's investigate this. So literally, like, there's pulse surveys, like keeping a pulse on it. But specifically for the things that are working, that are still important to employees, when you think about, we talk about a lot of negative and retention issues, but like the positives, just keep asking, keep talking. And you should still do at least an annual engagement survey at minimum as well.
Thanks,
I totally,
Jasmine and Marsha. Yeah,
I totally agree with that. Yeah, I mean, ongoing, and it can look like different things, right? It can be a survey, it can be randomized peer group conversations, it can be over Slack. It's important, because this information is important to obtain ongoing. It's important to have an ongoing method and normalize these types of conversations where people don't feel afraid to say, you know what, they just rolled out this new benefit. I don't know if it really makes sense. Like, let's talk about it. Let's normalize having these conversations. And then more formally, there's obviously surveys and things like that. And then, you know, somewhere in the middle, you can have peer group conversations. But at the end of the day, I really love the point that Marsha brought up about, you know, making sure that you are being intentional about not focusing on one type of group to obtain the information and then making action decisions on that one group, because then that defeats the purpose, right? And so I just think that it's important to always have a pulse, kind of to what Jess was saying, on the ground of what's going on. And then also from a benefits perspective, being strategic and thoughtful about when you're obtaining that information, because if your, you know, benefits enrollment just closed, and then you're now asking people about what drives them from a benefits perspective, nothing's going to be done for a year. And so, you know, looking at the calendar and thinking ahead of what are the timeframes that you actually have as an employer to make the changes, and timing that appropriately when you're asking your employees, because when you open that door to ask employees certain information, they're going to expect something to change like fairly soon. You don't want them to have to wait another year at the next enrollment period to see that something's happened.
And these conversations are happening, whether you are a part of them or not. They are all happening.
Yes.
And I was just thinking about, you know, what the ladies have shared. And another piece that we have to think about is know who will be responsible once data is collected. So for example, I'm a single contributor right now, but my job is to support everyone in the institution, including students. So I am one, I'm always coming up with ideas, but I have a group of individuals that'll tell me, Marsha, slow down, you know, pace yourself. So what we've created was, it's a survey model that we're using where we do start, stop, and continue. So if there are things that I know that are important, especially with the growing needs of our students, we start things that we know we can continue through the year. So I work very heavily with student services, who puts on programs and different activities for students. But we've learned that in that process, they want more visibility by our leadership. So back in December, we hosted a mingle jingle, and students, faculty, staff, they attended. Our president sang. We had a really good time. And what we learned from that was, you know, the reason we didn't have more participation was not because we didn't want to support it, but at the time that it was being offered, it was from 4:30 to 6:30. We're ready to go home. So as we start building relationships and understanding what the needs of our employees are, we didn't just say, oh, well, that's just too bad. That's going to work for me, and that's the time we're going to do it. Now we have something that is ongoing that we can continue and ensure that we do get the support, the encouragement, and as well as the expectation is being met, that they're not going to say, oh, well, last year we said we preferred for it to be during lunch. Then you have somebody that say, I couldn't make it for lunch, but I wanted an afternoon. So maybe you create ways that as many people as possible can participate with flexibility. And that's with becoming agile, but not making commitments or promises that you cannot keep, because then you have to start all over again, trying to regain credibility. And then you lose more people than you initially disengaged from the beginning. So there's a lot of things we have to think about when we ask the questions. Are we actually going to answer them honestly? And if it is something we recognize is important, we have to be able to communicate to our community that, yes, we recognize this is important, but because we don't have all hands on deck to do this, this is what we're going to do, and keep them informed. I think that's the other piece, is just being, again, transparent, communicative, and ensuring that when somebody asks the questions and it may not necessarily align with when we were expecting to respond, at least be responsive. So great comments, ladies.
That's great. What I'm hearing is surveys, peer combos, Slack, however you can stay interviews, meeting with, a manager's manager above, however you can collect this data. But at the same time, also matters the timing so that you can execute on it, as well as keeping people up to date and keeping people informed as you make progress, or if you don't make progress, at the same time where you're at in the process, just to show that you're actually listening. Right, that's a point. It goes back to what Jasmine said. Are your employees feeling heard? Jess, were you going to say something? Okay. if there's any questions, please pop them into the chat. I know we are nearing the end, and we still have a ton of questions. And Marsha, Jess, and Jasmine, I'm learning so much from you. I'll come with a question, and again, if we see one in the chat, we will ask it. This one I thought was a great one. How do we identify, and maybe it goes back to the feedback, but is there any like quick tips of how to identify hidden dangers, issues? Jess, you mentioned people are talking about it regardless. Or is there any hot topic right now that people should be aware of in with toxic managers, departments, processes, not living up to your values? What's a easy way to figure this out?
Who aren't people talking about? Who is avoiding, who are saying, oh, well, marketing, well, never mind. You know, talking about body language, talking about emotional intelligence. You know, if you're a chief people officer, a high level people person, people might not want to talk to you. So who are your kind of delegates? Do you have HR business partners that can support getting information? And if they come back to you and say, hey, Jane Doe is a problem, I'm hearing that, you got to do something about it. Every single organization, there have been toxic people that I know for a fact the CEO and C-suite knew about and did nothing about. There was no additional training. There was no taking aside. There was no 3 strikes. There was no, you're fired, which at a certain point, one person, no matter how good of an IC they are, they're probably not a good manager, because if they're toxic, they're probably not a good manager. It's not worth the 5, 10, 15, 20 people you're going to lose because of them, because they will drive people away continually. And if you see that, if you see one manager continually losing people, if you see one department continually losing people, even if you like them, even if you're besties with them, like, suck up your own ego and let them go. Because that's what it comes down to when toxic people aren't let go. It's to the egos of those above them every single time.
I would say probably something that I'm hearing a lot about, and this is, I don't know if we'll ever stop hearing this, but return to office. And you know, we briefly touched on this earlier about how there are some people who prefer to be at home full time, and there are some people that require that level of high interaction going into the office. And there's some people that are some of both. And so I think, you know, that's a lot of buzz right now. I think it's going to continue to get a lot of buzz. And I think that employers need to be very thoughtful about what works for them and not looking at what their peer organizations are doing, number one. Number two, I think employers should have a good understanding of the type of culture, not only that they have like current state, but what kind of culture do they want future state? And where does return to office, if required, fall into that? If you want to be a certain type of organization and you're implementing a policy that may not align with that, then you're not probably going to get to the culture that you're requiring. And then thirdly, recognizing that there are so many factors that are contributing to people, whether they want to be in the office or at home or some of both. It goes back to the idea of being human. And just because you may be a leader and you are more comfortable going into the office because of your story, because of your environment, because of your culture specifically, doesn't mean that everybody else will. And so this is a time where empathy is more important than it ever has been, is because we need to be thoughtful about the situations that people are having at home, people have with their families, people have with their friends. You know, we're in tough times, right? And so we need to be flexible and thoughtful about how do we make sure that the employee base feels supported. Again, they feel seen, they feel heard, while also balancing what's best for the business and the bottom line. And it's sometimes not going to be a one size, again, I keep saying this, a one size fits all answer. But I do encourage, you know, employees are talking about that, right? Like they either are loving what's happening within the organization or they're not, or maybe they're okay with it. But as you continue to attract new talent wants to know, do I have flexibility if I take this job here? Right. Or will I have to be in this model of what maybe everybody else at the organization works because they're in this, you know, specific culture and they're in this specific environment, or they're having these things happening, but that doesn't apply to me. Like from the jump with that type of build out, you're already unattracting people because you're saying we may not be an inclusive culture. So that's my 2 cents about buzz that I'm hearing.
And I did want to say, when we were talking about a toxic environment, part of this, we as individuals, we have a propensity to feel comfortable talking to certain people about certain things. And I think it's important that we mitigate that negative energy as well, because the person that may be the toxic person is the one that you're entertaining their communication. So I think if you're in an environment, whether it be virtual, and it's like Jess said, some of those nonverbal cues when you're in a meeting and you see someone rolling their eyes or turning off their video when a particular person is speaking, we have to have the courage to address that, because it may not be something that they are aware of, or it may be something that they're blatantly aware of, but we have to call things like we see them. So in order for us to improve toxic behaviors, you have to speak on those things that you observe. And if you're not in a position where you feel comfortable enough to do it, then have an advocate who, I tell my coworkers that I will say all the things that they're afraid to say. So they know that oftentimes when they share things with me, I'm not going to say, well, Jess or Jasmine said this. I'll say it was brought to my attention, and these are some of the things that are important, because the longer we entertain toxic behavior is the more that it's going to create obstacles for other people. And in light of everything that we have going on, I do not want to bear the burden of someone's purposeful mistreatment of someone else because I chose not to speak up. And it has, again, at the end of the day, nothing to do with our role, but I think our obligation as humans we were humankind. So kind is who we were made to be, is that we operate in a space of advocating for others. You don't have to be a DEI person or in human resources or, the president or CEO. You have to call things like you see them. And like Jasmine said, it may not always work out in your favor, but the bottom line is, if you are bold enough to talk about the things that are creating tension and individuals recognize, oh, when I go to Jess, Jasmine, or Marsha, and I'm talking about Natan, they're going to shut it down. At some point, if that becomes the behavior, and they start recognizing it, maybe they'll do a self-check, and in that time, human resources or whatever entities are there will either manage them out, they'll leave on their own, or they'll adjust and shift to a culture that's trying to amplify something that is about positive, that is about creating a space of safeness for everyone. And you will hold not only the person talking accountable, but the person who's willing to listen to that negative information accountable. And at some point it'll dissipate and hopefully go away.
Very well said. Very well said. And what I heard, just to summarize a few things, what's not being talked about, what's not being listened to, that would be potentially a flag to call up or to bring up to an advocate to mention, so that we are holding people accountable. And then at the same time, how are we showing flexibility? How are we showing inclusivity in the work environment? I mean, both of these things should be stuff that the people function, the HR function should know about. And if they don't know about, they should be understanding of how to get that information. Jess, were you going to say something?
Yeah, and Suzette in the chat has mentioned about microaggressions and race. I think oftentimes it lands on HR, but HR's voice gets silenced too. And so that's where platforms like All Voices and other platforms are great, because it allows HR to use data and say, I don't know the person. Like, this is like, it can't be about favoritism. It can't be about, oh, that person is, is terrible or is toxic. So be kind with HR unless they're the problem, and recognize that they, for the most part, want to be allies. In terms of what's in the chat, I would love Jasmine and Marsha's thoughts.
As far as the microaggressions, one of the things that I've said, having transitioned to Pittsburgh, I come from a very diverse background. I was born in England. My parents are of Jamaican heritage. I moved to America, lived in New York City, Connecticut, and then moved to Texas. There are things about my authenticity that some people may not find necessarily the most attractive, because I tend to be very direct, of course, concerning myself around empathy. But I say all that to say this. The other idea is, you can't just assume that when somebody asks you a particular question, that it's a slight or a microaggression. So for example, I've had people ask me where I'm from. I'm not offended by that, because I'm always thinking it's because of the way I sound. Sometimes I sound very British. If I get passionate, I sound West Indian. And then I have what I consider my American accent, but people don't believe it's an American accent. So I say all that to say this: you have to reach people where they are. I try to disarm any potential microaggressions by being myself and exposing who I am from the beginning. So if someone does have in their mind that all people are a certain way, I am breaking down that barrier and causing them to take pause to think about where those particular thoughts may have come from. I'm not saying microaggressions do not exist, but the other thing that I would say to Suzette, if you recognize a microaggression and something that is uncomfortable, if you are not comfortable enough to address that individual, or it gets escalated, I would just say be brave enough to walk away and address that issue another time when that person may have had a time to think about what they've said or done. Because a microaggression, there are so many, you have the micro assaults, there are so many things that come up in a particular issue that if you don't handle it the right way, then you then create more tension around something that could again be addressed at a different time. And I'd also encourage you, if your human resources or diversity, equity, and inclusion team has not had training, there are resources that are available that are online. And they're small, informal ways that you can educate someone without making them feel bad in person. A gentle reminder via email sharing, oh, I just learned about this. I was so excited about it, wanted to pass it along. But you don't just pass it along to the person who was the party that may have demonstrated the microaggression. Share it in an environment where everybody can be partaking and ensure that everyone understands. And the other thing that I would say is don't use terms and phrases that most people don't understand or recognize. We are in a world where there are a plethora of acronyms, and so often we in our experienced spaces, we're using phrases and terms that others don't understand. If I said microaggression, somebody may not understand, but if I say you were just downright, I think throwing shade or passive aggressive, people understand that. So we have to remember to reach people where they are, but still hold them accountable.
You know what? I'm just gonna let her go ahead. Marsha, just drop the mic right there. I think all of the attendees are agreeing, so I completely second everything that you said.
I'll just say accountability for yourself, for your actions, for someone else is part of that authenticity. You want to be an authentic employer, be accountable for yourself, for your organization, for your C-suite, for your actions, for the missteps, as well as the wins and the missteps as well. Accountability.
That was great. I learned so much. Marsha, were you going to say something else? We can't hear you.
I'm sorry, you see my eyes moving back and forth. I'm just making sure we haven't missed anything in the chat. Sorry.
Yeah, if we still have a few minutes, well, just looking at the chat, there will be a recording, I believe, sent out. Christina will have more on that. This was fantastic. I mean, what I heard right there, obviously accountability. I loved what you said, also assuming positive intent, but in the right circumstances, of course, calling it out and making sure that one, we're being, Marsha, you mentioned being overly obviously transparent with who you are so you can minimize those, whatever passive aggressive microaggressions, et cetera. At the same time, in the right format, calling it out, sharing it when you learn. Also, when you learn and you honor someone else and then their teaching, sharing it with others and being vulnerable that it's okay to learn, it's okay to be wrong, I think creates a very positive culture. And something I love about cultures when people share what they've learned, that's fantastic. I think we're out of time. Jasmine, Jess, Marsha, Christina, all voices, thank you so much for spending your time here this morning, this afternoon. Very helpful. I'm excited to look at the recording again. You are all fantastic people. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Thank you so much.